Good morning and welcome to First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Annie Foerster and I am minister of this congregation, and so happy that you are joining us this morning for our recorded service. The Board of Trustees continues to review the information coming in this area about the pandemic and deciding month by month when we might open again. I doubt if it will be soon, but every month we will take the temperature of what's going on in Fort Worth and Arlington and let you know what we decide. In the meantime, I'm glad you are joining our worship service this morning, and let us begin our worship with a prelude. My opening words this morning are from the Reverend Gretchen Haley, and she wrote this: "Whatever you have come here in anticipating, whatever you expect or worry about for our world, for the future, for our lives, let it go for now. Make space in your heart to be surprised. Make room in your soul for a new story to take shape. Let astonishment be possible at this life that remains a miracle. Imagine here the bursting of joy, relentless and resilient, coming in waves, washing over us like music, and story and silence, and this dreaming together, being hope for each other, and courage to believe in this new day dawning for us all. Come, let us worship together. And let us sing together. Our opening hymn is number 357, Bright Morning Stars. The words will be on your screen, and we're happy again this morning to have David Bindi as our song leader.
Stars
Thank you, David, and thank you, Marisha Bresnev, for the wonderful piano playing accompaniment. We light our chalice this morning for expectation. Please join me in saying the words on your screen. We kindle this flame in expectation, not the expectation that justice will soon prevail, not the expectation that the struggle will soon be won, yet in the expectation that companionship and joy will be ours on the journey. We kindle this flame in community and expectation. Our covenant, it goes like this. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. In greening lands begins the song, which deep in human hearts is strong. In cheerful strains your voices raise to fill the whole spring world with praise. I'm going to do things a little differently today. When we first started recording our services, I wanted to keep them familiar for you. I wanted to stay in the format we were used to. It seemed like a promise that we would return to normal someday soon. I'm not sure I can make that promise, at least not the soon part. I heard this week that churches returning to in-person services are cautioned not to sing together because singing spreads multiple germs all at once. Also, they are cautioned not to do unison readings or responsive readings. We don't know what services will look like when we first return. The terms familiar and normal don't have the same meaning they had 10 weeks ago. So I want to try different approaches to our being together online. I want us to practice being flexible in our new definition of community. I want us to be comfortable trying out new ways of being together, even while we are apart, so that when we do come back together, the new normal won't be such a shock. Up through the doxology this morning, I've given you the familiar. Now for something entirely different. Today, right now, I'm going to ask you a question. Well, a series of questions. I want you to be thinking about your answers to them. And throughout the service, I will suggest possible responses, not answers. I can't provide answers for you all. My responses may be in the form of readings, they may be words of my own, they may be a story for all ages, possibly all of the above. Don't accept the first response I give you. Just keep thinking about the questions. And sometime, while you're watching the service or afterward, tell me what you're thinking about. Leave a comment on Facebook or email me at minister@firstjefferson.org. Let's do community when we can't be face-to-face with one another by talking with one another, sharing our thoughts. Will you try this new normal for me? Here's the question for today. What do you expect? Well, let me make that a little broader. What do you expect of your life, in your life? What do you expect of yourself, and why? What are your expectations of other people, the ones you know and the ones you don't know, if there is a difference? Do expectations make a difference in our lives? That's the main body of questions I want you to consider today. Do expectations make a difference in your life? And let me start your thinking with this scientifically proven fact. Placebos work because we expect them to. So now I'm going to bring you a story for all ages. This one is adapted from a story called The Empty Pot by Demi. Long, long ago, the emperor of an ancient land was getting on in years. He had no children of his own, but he decided to choose one of the children of his land to be the next emperor after him. He would choose someone who was honest and hardworking and thoughtful, and he would train him or her in the art of becoming a good leader. He would start with a simple test. Now, the emperor loved plants, so nobody was surprised by the test that he offered to the children. He said, "I will give one seed to each child who wants to participate. You come back in a year, and when I see what you have grown from your seed, I will choose the next emperor by their results." Well, the children all ran from the palace, smiling. All they had to do was grow one seed, and they might become emperor. But a year is a long time. Some of the children planted their seed, but after a while forgot to water it. Some became discouraged after a week and simply threw the seed away. Some of them put off planting it for later and then forgot all about the test. But one child took care of the seed right away. It was planted in a clean clay pot, watered, and put in a moderately sunny window. The seed was watered whenever the soil became dry. Weeks went by. When the children got together to play, some of them boasted of the wonderful large plants they had grown, but this particular seed did not sprout. The child tried moving the pot to another window. The child tried watering the seed more often. The child even tried singing to the unborn plant, but no matter what the child did, the seed did not grow. A year passed. It was time to return to the emperor. And this particular child was disappointed, ashamed that the seed had not grown. The child's grandfather said, "You did your best. You were caring. You were patient. Simply be honest with the emperor and explain that you did your best. That's all any of us can do." Well, the child returned to the palace with an empty pot held carefully in his arms. The children lined up to present their plants. The first child had a large plant with thick leaves, a ginseng plant that could be used to make paper and medicine. The next child had a eucalyptus plant, a healthy, strong plant that soon would become a big tree, big enough to produce food for many animals. And when our child's turn came, all that was there to be shown was an empty pot. Feeling very embarrassed, the child held the empty pot up for the emperor to see. Our child explained how the seed had been lovingly cared for, but still did not grow. There were tears in this child's eyes. The emperor smiled at the child and spoke to the gathered crowd. "There is only one among you who is honest enough to be the emperor," he said. "The seeds that I gave you had been boiled, so that none of them would ever grow. These wonderful plants that some children have shown me did not come from the seeds I gave them." Now some of the other children looked ashamed because they had not been honest, and the emperor knew it. Only one child cared for the seed even when it did not grow, the emperor said. Only this child gave the seed all it needed and asked for nothing else. Only this child was honest enough to show me an empty pot. This child will someday be your new emperor. Now, some of the other children felt cheated because the rules hadn't been explained to them. They thought that winning meant having the best plant. They had expected to be judged by the results, not by their efforts. Was that even fair? How would you answer that question? Well, I'm ready to give you my first response. to whose expectations do you live by? This is a true story. The teacher passed out the graded essays on Monday morning. They had been handed in the previous Friday, the first assignment for the new class of students. I watched as he put some pages on the desk face down and others face up. And I noticed that all the pages face up were marked with a red A. I could only assume that those distributed face down had a lesser grade. My paper floated to my desk face up, and I began to smile. And then I looked again, gasped, and turned the paper over. My mother is going to kill me, I thought. I had gotten only an A-. All my life, I had been told that I was an A student, and nothing less was acceptable. But this wasn't 5th grade. This wasn't even high school. This was seminary. I was 47 years old. My mother would never see the paper. She really wasn't interested because she was already disappointed that I had chosen the path of ministry instead of something more exalted, in her opinion. But her expectations, planted in me from the first day of school, could still make my heart beat with trepidation. This was not the only family expectation that I have had to root out in my life to make room for my own plans. This wasn't the first time I had this realization, and it would not be the last. It is probably one of the hardest things a person has to do in his or her life, and that is to understand that the rules we choose to live with are based on someone else's expectations. But we do choose, or we can choose. Not choosing is indeed a choice. Sometimes those expectations can be inspiring, enlightening, freeing, but sometimes they can be a barrier to further exploration. I can laugh today at that grown woman who let a minus sign throw her for a moment. But I'm also proud of the same woman who won the academics prize in her seminary graduation 3 years later. And I give my parents credit for instilling in me the strength to keep improving myself, even when what I'm doing isn't to their liking. I've had many good teachers in my life, some of them living, some of them authors long past their own life on this earth. But the best education for me has always been what I learned from my own mistakes and when I choose to make a change based on them. I feel a kindred spirit with Henry David Thoreau when I read his words, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." Whose expectation guides your life? Well, let's go back for a moment to something familiar. Let's go to our communion of names and milestones when we tell the stories that are living in this community. Yesterday, Saturday, May 30th, was Carl Thibodeau's birthday. Carl, as you know, is the church administrator for this congregation, and we wished him a very happy birthday yesterday. Also on Saturday, we hung the banners, which were a gift from an anonymous member of the church, and they can be found as we videotape them on our website later in the week. I want to read a letter that came to me from an old First Jefferson member, a man that I don't know, but many of you probably will recognize his name. Greg Songer wrote to me and said, "All the friends that I made when I went to First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church still remain in my heart. He was here when Marjorie Montgomery was the minister from 1980 to 1990. And he wrote, "Hi to my old friends. I was a member from sometime in the 90s until about 2002 when I moved back to Ohio. You might remember me from the building and grounds, the board, teaching RE, playing trombone in whatever piece Roy needed me to, the men's group, and more. I've been married, I know some of you thought it would never happen, to Cindy for 14 years, and now I'm retired, but I still play the trombone. I would love to hear from anybody who remembers me. Thanks." And he signed it, Greg Songer. His email address is gsonger70@yahoo.com. That was really a nice letter to receive. I don't like watching the news any more than you do. There's so much about the virus, so much about the violence. And I don't want to lift it all up again, and yet I keep thinking about the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I can't get it out of my mind. I am appalled, and I'm not surprised, and I think that appalls me even more, that I'm not surprised that things like this keep happening, and they make us feel so terribly helpless, angry and helpless. Please join me in a moment of shared silence as we consider the happy stories in this congregation, the concerns, the sad stories, and the sad condition of our world right now, and wonder how we can continue to live in it. Keep us in your minds. Keep your friends, your family, your loved ones in your mind. Keep your enemies in your mind as well. We all live in difficult times together. Misha. I'm ready to give you my second response. The question I want to respond to this time is, when is enough enough? I'm not fully satisfied with my first response. I want to add to it. Here's something I've learned from my own mistakes. Even your own expectations of yourself can be faulty, can be limiting. You also have to know when to let go of them. I usually do a reading before I present my own thoughts, but here is a reading for after my first thought and response. It's called Even This Is Enough by Vanessa Southern. And she wrote, so much undone, so much to do, so much to heal in us and the world. So much to acquire, a meal, a healthy body, a fit one, a lover, a job, a better job, proof we have and are enough just around the corner of now. And up against it, the reality of all that falls short in the limits of today. We honor the limits. If your body won't do what it used to for right now, let it be enough. If your mind won't stop racing or can't think of the word, let it be enough. If you are utterly alone and in despair, be all that here with us. If today you cannot sing because your throat hurts or you don't have the heart for music, it's okay to be silent. The world won't stop spinning on her axis if you don't rise to all occasions today. Love won't cease to flow in your direction. Your heart won't stop beating. All hope won't be lost. You are part of the plan for this world's salvation. Of that, I have no doubt. The world needs its oceans of people striving to be good, to carry us to the shores of hope and wash fear from the beachheads and cleanse all wounds so that they can heal. But oceans are big, and I'm sure there are parts that don't feel up to the task of the whole some days. So rest if you must then, like the swimmer lying on her back who floats, or the hawk carried on cushions of air. Rest in pews made to hold weary lives in space carved out for the doing of nothing much but being. Perhaps then you will feel in your bones, in your weary heart, the aching, healing sense that this is enough, even this, that we are enough, you are enough, enough. I think every day we all have to learn to be at peace with our expectations, keep them in balance. So on the faithful expectation that there is something in us that can and will blossom, even in the midst of storms, I invite us to sing again. A short hymn, number 396 in your books, and the word will be on your screen. It's titled, I Know This Rose Will Open. Consider yourselves the rose.
I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will unfurl its wings. I know this rose will open.
Keep that in mind as we continue to respond to the question of expectations. I have a treat today. I have another story for all ages. It's a treat for me. I love telling them. This one is adapted from a Middle Eastern Islamic folk tale, which is attributed to different countries, including both Turkey and Syria. And it goes like this. Mullah Nasruddin had been working in the fields all day long. He was tired and sweaty, and his clothes and shoes were covered with mud and stains. Because he had been fasting all day long for Ramadan, he was also very hungry. But finally, it was almost sundown. His work was finally finished, and he knew he would soon be able to eat. You see, the wealthiest man in town had invited him and others to come break their fasts in his home that evening with a huge feast. Nasrudin knew that he would be late if he went home to change his clothes before heading into town, so he decided it was better to arrive in dirty clothes than to suffer the rudeness of being late to the party. Oh, what a party it would be, he thought. What a feast. And as he walked to the wealthy man's home, Nasrudin imagined the delicious foods that he would soon be eating. Dates and lentils and chickpeas and olives, bread and hummus, falafel, chicken and beef, and best of all, the desserts, halva, date rolls, figs, and baklava. When Nasrudin arrived, the wealthy man opened the door and looked Nasrudin up and down scornfully, from his worn, ragged clothes to his muddy shoes, and without a word of welcome, he gestured Nasrudin to come in and then walked away. I wonder what that man was thinking. What do you imagine was going through his mind? Well, Nasrudin joined the throngs of people who were all dressed in their finest clothing. The tables were laden with all sorts of delicious food, dates and lentils and chickpeas, olives and bread, hummus, falafel, chicken and beef, and best of all, the desserts, halva, date rolls, figs, and baklava. Despite his efforts to hurry, the seats were all taken, and nobody tried to move over to make a space at the table for Nasrudin. In fact, nobody offered him food. He had to reach over and around people to get any food on his plate, and nobody spoke to him. It was as if he wasn't even there. I wonder what Nasrudin was feeling. What do you imagine was going through his mind? The other guests ignored him so completely that Nasrudin could not enjoy the food on his plate, no matter how finely prepared and how tasty it was. In fact, after only a few bites, Nasrudin was so uncomfortable, he decided to leave. He hurried home and changed into his finest clothing, including a beautiful coat that he had bought just for the occasion. Nasrudin returned to the feast, and this time the host welcomed him with a huge smile. Come in, greeted the host. As Nasrudin entered, people waved and called to him from all corners of the room as they invited him to sit near them and offered him food. I wonder if the guests did not recognize Nasrudin from before. What do you imagine was going through their minds? Well, Nasrudin sat down quietly, and picking up a plump fig, he carefully placed it into his coat pocket, saying, "Eat, coat, eat." And next he took a handful of nuts and he put them in the pocket, saying, "Eat, coat, eat." And now he began to feed his coat in earnest, grabbing all sorts of foods. He fed the coat lentils and chickpeas, olives and bread, hummus, falafel, chicken and beef, and best of all, the desserts, halva, date rolls, figs, and baklava. The guests became silent as they watched this strange behavior, and soon everyone in the room was staring at Nasrudin, wondering what he was doing. The host hurried over. "Nasrudin, what are you doing? Why are you feeding your coat in this manner?" "Well," replied Nasrudin, "when I first came to this feast in my old farming clothes, I was not welcomed. No one would speak with me. But when I changed into this lovely coat, suddenly I was greeted warmly. So I realized it was not I who was welcome at this party, but my clothing, and so I am feeding my coat." I'm wondering what you think of this story. I'm ready for response number 3 if you are. What expectations do I have of other people? This is another true story, a recent one. This was last Monday, and it was raining. I couldn't work in the yard, and I decided to clean my kitchen. And while doing so, I found an old recipe for yogurt salad dressing I had forgotten about, and I decided I would make some. The recipe called for anchovy paste, which I don't normally keep on hand. I had all day before me. I'd just go to the store and pick some up. I started at a local grocery, and the clerk I asked said he thought the paste would be with the canned tuna. He followed me to the proper aisle, looked where I'd already checked, and said, "Nope, I don't carry it." So I chose another store a little further away from my home, but also a bit more upscale. I looked in the aisle where the canned tuna was, and I didn't see any anchovy paste. So I retraced my steps and found a young man at the door stocking shelves on his knees, filling the lowest shelf. He was very young. He was a little bit chubby, and he had spilled something on his apron. But I asked him where they kept the anchovy paste, and he jumped up, smiled warmly at me, and said, "Oh, let me show you." He was kind of cute when he smiled. As we walked, he turned to me and said, "What is it you're going to make?" And he really sounded interested, like he actually cared. And I told him, and he said, "Oh, that sounds delicious." Well, we found the shelf, but the spot where the anchovy paste was usually kept was empty. Well, I was disappointed, but he must have seen that on my face. "Don't worry," he said. "If you have a blender, you can make anchovy paste out of canned anchovies. I've done it many times," he told me, "and you can freeze the leftovers." I was talking to a real cook. He showed me the choices of anchovies and suggested I try the ones canned in oil rather than water. "Tastier," he told me. "Anything else I can help you with?" I thanked him profusely, delighted with having discovered this gem of a grocery store clerk. It wasn't until I was driving home that I became a bit ashamed of myself for the expectations I had visited upon him because of his youth, his imperfect shape, and his dirty apron. Do people ever surprise you? Perhaps you ought to examine your expectations. I have a reading today called Recognition, and I brought something with me today that might help you visualize this reading. It's a sweet potato. I pulled it from my vegetable basket. It's already sprouting. I probably should have used it last week, but that's not the point. Here's the reading. It is so difficult to see this sweet potato because the countless others we've seen before cloud our view, along with how we expect it to look and how it might be improved. Even the faces of the ones we love deeply hide like buried treasure behind histories of expression. In order to see what is right in front of our faces, in order to see what is right in front of our faces, we first have to recognize we have gradually become blind and then begin the slow work of forgetting what a sweet potato should look like so that when we see it, we can see it in all its original glory. My response 4, what expectations do you have of your faith? I have become used to living in a world with a pandemic. I have become unsurprised at arriving at a near-empty church and saying my prepared words to an imagined audience. My expectations that you are out there listening to me, I tell myself, are what keep me going. But to tell the truth, it has become simply a new habit, a new way of doing things. Like you, I imagine I long for the old way, the familiar, even knowing it won't return, not just as it was. But I don't want to forget, as I'm forgetting what used to be, why I am a Unitarian Universalist. I don't want to work at my computer putting words on the screen that will later be printed out to be this, out of habit or imagined expectations of what I think you want. I want to find new ways to hear your thoughts, convince you that they are important to me. I want to interact with you the way we used to, but differently. I'm scared because, as Darren Larson told us in our last meeting, my view is possibly being clouded over by what I expect the future might look like. I want to tell you, because it is all I can do right now, what it is that inspires me, that keeps me going. I look at the slim crew that makes these broadcasts possible, and I am inspired by their dedication to this community. I come on Wednesdays to talk with Carl Thibodeau, the church administrator, about what is happening, and with David Winkowski, the board president, when he is here, about what is possible. I see the box at the door that is full of dog food and cat food that we are packaging up to be given out at the food bank at Eastside Community Assistance. And I am inspired by your generosity. I look at the new banners that were purchased by an anonymous donor from our congregation, which we have waited for so long, and which were hung yesterday. I am hoping that you will be able to come and see them, or at least see the video that we took as I bless the banners on your behalf. And I'm so happy that we will not only be wearing our hearts on our sleeves, but our values on our building. I am so proud of us, of you, of this beloved community, temporarily absent. It's what keeps me going. It's what fuels my expectations for the future. 3 of us from this congregation, Mary West, Julie Havalone, and myself, Children's Religious Education, Worship Arts, and Ministry, have signed up for an online course titled Video Ministry Academy. The North Texas Unitarian Universalist Congregations Organization has subsidized the cost of this training, and we have paid the rest. It is taught by Peter Bowden, a Unitarian Universalist who has worked in expanding ministries within our churches. And he is going to be teaching us new ways to be connected, because the old ways, as I've already said this morning, are not coming back, not like they were. He says we needed to change anyway so we could reach a younger audience, a newer audience. He says we needed change anyway so we could make it easier for people to find us in the first place. He says we needed to look at common things in front of us, like sweet potatoes, with new eyes. He says we have to have new expectations, not new values, not new intentions, not just new videos. We need to have new expectations, clearer expectations of ourselves, our faith, of each other, and of the world. There is a new day coming when we will be together. And I know this rose will open. I don't always sing the same hymn twice, but I think this one is so important to our expectations. I want us to sing it again, and to sing it twice this time.
I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will unfurl its wings. I know this rose will open. I know this rose will open. I know my heart will burn away. I know my soul will unfurl its wings. I know this rose will open.
Thank you, David and Misha, and thank you, Julie and Guy, for the behind-the-scenes work on this recorded service. I'm going to extinguish our chalice now with the words of Robert Bly. They're a little longer than I usually use for the chalice extinguishing, but I think you will understand why. This chalice has burned, lighting the way for all our expectations. We take it into our hearts and our minds as we go our ways this Sunday Until next week. Think in ways you've never thought before. If the phone rings, think of it as carrying a message larger than anything you've ever heard, vaster than 100 lines of Yeats. Think that someone may bring a bear to your door, may be wounded and deranged, or think that a moose has risen out of the lake and he's carrying on his antlers a child of your own whom you've never ever seen before. When someone knocks on the door, think that he's about to give you something large, tell you you're forgiven, or that it's not necessary to work all the time, or that it's been decided that if you lie down for a few minutes, no one will die. Think about your expectations. Let us conclude our service with music.